The anatomy of a React app. There are many ways to start a React project, but the most common tool is Create React App. Other popular options include Vite and Next.js. To use it, run npx create React app from the command line, and it will scaffold a starter project for you. Most importantly, this tool manages a Webpack config behind the scenes, so you don't have to. Webpack is a module bundler that is responsible for combining all of your JavaScript code into a single file that can be used by a web browser. But when you generate your first application, you might be wondering what all these different files do. Well, first, we have a package.json. This is where you install dependencies from Node Package Manager. Notice how React is listed as a dependency here. That's because it's our first external dependency. The actual source code for your dependencies is downloaded into the Node modules folder. You should never have to modify anything here directly. Next, we have a public directory for static files and also the HTML shell for your website. Notice how inside the HTML file, it has a div with an ID of root. This is where your actual React app will be mounted. Typically, you shouldn't have to write any code here because all of the action happens in the source directory. The index.js file is the initial entry point that tells the React app how to start up. Notice how it's calling the React DOM render method, which is a function that takes two arguments, the React application itself and the element in the DOM with an ID of root that we looked at in the HTML that the application will replace. It's also worth noting that we're importing our global CSS here from the index.css file. Under the hood, Webpack will automatically bundle all of the CSS with the final application code. By default, React runs in strict mode to detect unsafe code automatically. You can remove this component and everything will work, but I wouldn't recommend it unless you know what you're doing. Now, the first actual React component is defined in the app.js file. Component files also commonly end in .jsx. The component can import images and CSS, but most importantly, it defines a function, which is a React component, and then exports that as the default from this file. It's a good practice to only export one component from each file that you define. Now, Create React App also contains a web server that we can run by opening the terminal and entering npm start. It will monitor changes in your code, so if you change any value, it will automatically be reflected in the browser. You'll keep that running during development, but when it comes time to build your app for production, run npm run build. That generates a build file, which is the thing you would actually deploy to a storage bucket somewhere in the cloud to serve your app on the internet. Notice how it creates a build directory, and inside that directory, you'll find a static JS directory that contains your actual JavaScript bundle. This code contains all of your minified dependencies and source code and will be interpreted by the browser when somebody visits your app. Also notice how it has a random number or hash in the file name. It does that so each new build will invalidate anything that's been cached by the browser. And that's how a basic React app goes from 0 to production.